In the year 1296, two prisoners shared a cell in a Genoese jail. One was a Venetian merchant who had spent years wandering the farthest reaches of Asia and had served at the court of a Mongol emperor. The other was a writer of romances named Rustichello da Pisa. The merchant began telling his cellmate what he had seen in the East. Palaces roofed in gold, money printed on paper, black stones dug from the ground and burned for fuel, the workings of an empire that seemed to have no edge. Rustichello wrote it all down. When the resulting book appeared, people first called it The Million, because no one believed that so many wonders could possibly be true. Today, we know it as the Travels of Marco Polo. So how did a text born in a prison cell go on to reshape the way an entire continent imagined the East? A story whispered in a prison cell 7 centuries ago is still being read across the world today. Here it is. First, the author. Marco Polo was born in Venice in 1254 into a family of merchants. His father, Niccolo, and his uncle Maffeo had already set out on their own journey east around 1259 or 1260, long before Marco joined them. In 1266, the two brothers reached the court of Kublai Khan in his capital, Dadu. The Khan received them and sent them back toward Europe with an envoy of his own, carrying a request for the Pope to send 100 learned men to teach Christianity, along with oil from the lamp at the Holy Sepulchre. The brothers returned to Venice around 1269 or 1270, only to find the papal election dragging on for years with no new pope chosen. When Pope Gregory X was finally elected in 1271, Niccolo and Maffeo set out once more, this time bringing 17-year-old Marco and 2 Dominican friars along with them. It was the beginning of a journey that would last decades, crossing mountains and deserts by caravan and by ship. The overland route alone took roughly 3 years before they finally reached Khanbalik. Around 1275, the 3 Polos reached the court of Kublai Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire. Marco remained there for roughly 17 years, trusted enough to be sent as an envoy and official across the far reaches of the empire. In 1295, after 24 years away, the 3 men finally returned to Venice. Peace did not last long. In 1296, Marco was captured during a naval battle between Venice and Genoa and thrown into a Genoese prison. It was there, in captivity, that the book was born. After his release, Marco returned to Venice, married Donata Baudouin in 1300, and had 3 daughters. He died in Venice in January of 1324 and was buried in the Church of San Lorenzo. So, what is actually in the book? The Travels of Marco Polo unfolds in 4 parts. The first covers the long overland journey through the Middle East and Central Asia. The second, and by far the longest, is devoted to China and the court of Kublai Khan. The capital Marco calls Cambaluc in the book stood on the site of modern Beijing. Marco describes the splendor of the Khan's capital and the administrative order of the empire in detail that must have sounded unbelievable to European readers. The empire he described sprawled across more territory than all of Europe combined, and Marco kept trying to make that scale tangible, measuring it out in concrete distances and days of travel. He describes a currency printed on paper rather than struck in gold or silver, backed by the authority of the state. He describes black stones dug from the earth and burned in place of wood, in other words, coal. He describes a network of roads and relay riders stretching across the empire, capable of carrying messages at astonishing speed. The third part relays what he heard of Japan, India, Sri Lanka, and the coasts of Africa, including accounts of peoples said to practice cannibalism and of remote islands where spices were grown. The fourth turns to the Mongol Wars and the northern territories. Throughout, Marco writes like a merchant, recording distances, goods, taxes, and customs with the eye of someone used to keeping accounts. On the voyage home, he lingers over the coast of India, describing the pearl fisheries and bustling trading ports of the Malabar region in some of the richest geographic detail found anywhere in the book. The most debated question about the book has always been its accuracy. Marco Polo never mentions the Great Wall of China, a silence that has drawn attention for centuries. He says nothing of drinking tea, of eating with chopsticks, or of the practice of foot binding. These gaps led some scholars to question whether he actually reached China at all, or whether he was simply repeating what others had told him. But the case for authenticity is strong. In 2012, historian Hans Ulrich Vogel of the University of Tübingen showed that Marco's account of paper money, its shape, its size, the seals stamped on it, the regional variations in how it was used, matches Chinese documents from the period with striking precision. His figures on salt production and state revenue align with records from the Yuan dynasty. His mention of Christian churches in the city of Zhenjiang has been confirmed by 14th century Chinese sources. The economic historian Mark Elvin has said the book is essentially authentic and deserves to be treated as a serious witness. What makes this book endure is that it offers one of Europe's first sustained encounters with Asia, narrated by someone who had actually made the journey himself. Before Marco Polo, the East existed for most Europeans largely as legend and rumor. His account filled that gap with concrete, specific detail. In the centuries that followed, the book directly shaped mapmakers, merchants, and explorers who set out to see the world he described. The East imagined by the Age of Discovery was, in large part, the East sketched out on these pages. Reading it today feels like watching a medieval European's sense of the world suddenly expand. The book also achieved something rare for its era. Centuries before the printing press, when every copy had to be laboriously written out by hand, it became something close to a popular sensation, discussed and copied across Europe. As for the trivia, a few details stand out. The book's original Italian title, Il Milione, meaning the million, has a disputed origin. Some trace it to A Milione, a nickname used by the Polo family. Others believe the public gave the book that name as a jab at its supposedly exaggerated riches. Around 150 manuscript copies survive today, in Old French, Tuscan Italian, the Venetian dialect, and Latin. The first English translation was made by John Frampton in 1579. The text behind this very recording rests on the 19th century translation by Sir Henry Yule, later expanded with notes by Henri Cordier. The volume in your hands is the first of that two-volume edition, and the story continues in the second. Even in the Middle Ages, some readers treated the book less as testimony and more as a fable or an overstuffed romance, a skepticism that has followed it from the very beginning. The famous Catalan Atlas, drawn in 1375, was among the first maps to include place names taken directly from Marco Polo's account. And according to tradition, Christopher Columbus owned a heavily annotated copy of this very book, a copy that survives today in Spain. We have covered the travels of Marco Polo, but this is a book meant to be wandered through slowly, page by page, from one edge of the medieval world to the other. If you would like to listen to the complete book as an audiobook, you will find the link in the description. Subscribe for more books in this series. According to tradition, when Marco Polo lay dying and was pressed to admit his stories had been exaggerated, he answered that he had not told even half of what he had seen. Its accuracy is unconfirmed, but it captures the legacy he left behind all the same.